The moment my son accused me of losing my memory, I knew it was time to stop pretending. I live in Brookhaven, a quiet suburban city outside Atlanta, Georgia, where people believe nothing truly bad happens behind neat lawns and closed doors. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 68 years old, a widow, and according to my son Grayson, I am confused, fragile, and incapable of understanding paperwork. That version of me is the one he prefers, because it makes his life easier. Grayson works in real estate finance downtown. He wears tailored suits, speaks in confident tones, and tells everyone he is taking care of his aging mother. What he doesn't know is that I have been watching him for years. I learned long ago that silence makes people careless. When you let someone believe they are smarter than you, they reveal everything. After my husband died, I handled every document alone. Mortgages, property deeds, insurance forms, tax records. I learned patterns because survival demanded it. That knowledge never left me. Grayson liked to explain things slowly, loudly, as if I were a child. "Mom, you don't need to worry about this," he would say. "It's complicated." I would nod, because nodding made him comfortable. Comfort makes liars reckless. 2 years ago, I noticed the first inconsistency. A refinancing conversation that moved too fast. Documents I was never shown. Signatures that looked familiar but felt wrong. I didn't confront him. Confrontation makes people cautious. Instead, I leaned into the role he assigned me. I forgot names. I repeated questions. I let him correct me in front of others. Every correction inflated his confidence. With confidence came mistakes. Small money transfers. Slight changes in paperwork. Excuses that didn't align. He assumed I didn't know how to use a computer, and he was right. But he forgot something far more powerful. I understand people. I understand fear. Fear shows itself in rushed explanations and unnecessary smiles. In Brookhaven, people talk. Bank clerks remember faces. Accountants notice patterns. I listened. I waited. The day I decided to speak was not the day I had the most evidence. It was the day I knew Grayson would panic. Panic tells the truth faster than any confession. That morning, as he sat at my kitchen table scrolling through his phone, relaxed and careless, I casually mentioned that there were questions downtown about document irregularities tied to my property. It wasn't true. There was no investigation. But when Grayson stood up so fast that his chair crashed onto the floor, I knew the game I had been quietly playing was finally over. Grayson stared at the fallen chair for a second longer than necessary before forcing a laugh that sounded too sharp to be natural. "That's ridiculous," he said, straightening his jacket as if the movement could restore his control. "You don't even understand those documents, Mom." He picked the chair up and placed it back carefully, slowly, as if buying himself time. "You don't know how to use a computer. You barely know how email works." I watched him without responding. Silence makes people uncomfortable when they are guilty. He mistook my quiet for confusion. "See," he continued. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've been forgetting things lately. Dates. Conversations. It's not your fault." He said it gently, the way people speak when they want to sound concerned while planting doubt. "I think you should see someone. A professional. Memory issues don't get better on their own." There it was. The move I had been waiting for. Gaslighting always arrives dressed as concern. I folded my hands on the table and looked at him calmly. "Confused?" I asked softly. My tone made him pause. "Confused like when I forgot to tell you that 8 years ago I opened a separate savings account under my own trust?" His smile faltered. I didn't stop. "Or confused like when I forgot to mention that after your father passed, I took evening classes in financial management and basic contract law at a community college right here in DeKalb County?" He swallowed. The room felt smaller. "Or confused like when I forgot to tell you that I keep a handwritten ledger of every transaction connected to this house?" His eyes flicked toward the hallway where my study was. I could see calculation replacing confidence. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since he had walked into my kitchen that morning, Grayson wasn't explaining anything. He was listening. And listening, for someone who believes he is in control, is terrifying. Mom, he said finally, lowering his voice, you're not making sense. I leaned back slightly, meeting his eyes. No, I replied. I'm making you nervous. There's a difference. His breathing had changed. Shorter. Faster. Panic has a sound if you listen closely. He had spent years assuming I was weak because I chose not to speak. He never considered the possibility that I was silent because I was collecting pieces. In Brookhaven, people assume quiet means unaware. Grayson made the same mistake. And now, sitting across from me, he was beginning to realize that the story he had built so carefully was starting to crack, not because I raised my voice, but because I finally stopped pretending to forget. Grayson tried to regain his balance by pacing slowly across the kitchen, his polished shoes clicking against the floor in a rhythm that betrayed his nerves. You're overthinking this, he said, waving one hand dismissively. There is no investigation. If there were, I would know about it. He stopped near the window, staring outside as if answers might appear on the quiet Brookhaven street. I let the silence stretch until it pressed against him. That's interesting, I said at last. Because the questions weren't coming from your office. They were coming from the county. He turned sharply. What questions? The speed of his response told me everything. Fear always asks questions too quickly. Questions about document dates, I continued calmly. Signatures that don't align. Filings that were submitted without proper authorization. I watched his jaw tighten. That's impossible, he said. You wouldn't even recognize those things. I smiled faintly. You're right, I said. I don't recognize them. I remember them. He scoffed, but the sound lacked confidence. Mom, you're letting your imagination run wild. Stress does that at your age. There it was again. Age as a weapon. I nodded slowly. Stress does strange things, I agreed. Like making people rush when they should wait. He frowned. What does that mean? It means, I said evenly, that when someone believes they're safe, they stop being careful. I stood and walked past him toward the counter, deliberately unhurried. Tell me, Grayson, I added, why would someone submit revised documents before the originals were officially archived? His reflection stared back at him in the glass of the cabinet door. He opened his mouth, then closed it. That doesn't make sense, he muttered. It doesn't have to, I replied. It just has to exist. His breathing grew uneven. You don't have proof, he said, trying to anchor himself to certainty. No, I answered. Not yet. The words landed harder than any accusation. But investigations don't begin with proof, I continued. They begin with inconsistencies. He laughed again, louder this time, a sound meant for an audience that wasn't there. This is absurd, he said. You're trying to scare me. I met his eyes. I don't need to scare you, I said quietly. Fear comes naturally when someone realizes they might not be as invisible as they thought. He stopped pacing. For the first time, he looked at me not as his mother, not as someone fragile, but as an unknown variable. Who have you been talking to? He asked. I shrugged lightly. People who pay attention. In Brookhaven, quiet conversations travel faster than loud ones. Bank clerks, filing officers, former colleagues of my husband. People who still remembered my name even when my son assumed the world had forgotten it. Grayson rubbed his forehead, frustration seeping through the cracks of his composure. He had built his confidence on the belief that I was alone and unaware. Sitting there, watching him unravel in small, careful movements, I understood something clearly. The lie about the investigation was doing exactly what I needed. It wasn't exposing the truth. It was forcing him to reveal it himself. Grayson's confidence didn't disappear all at once, it eroded in layers, the way old paint peels when the surface can no longer hide what's underneath. He leaned against the counter and folded his arms, a defensive posture he had used since childhood whenever he felt cornered. Even if there were inconsistencies, he said carefully, choosing each word, they wouldn't lead anywhere. These things happen all the time. I nodded as if agreeing. Agreement makes people talk. You're right, I said. They do happen. Especially when someone believes no one is paying attention. His eyes narrowed. You're implying something. I'm observing, I replied. There's a difference. I walked toward the hallway and stopped near the door of my study, letting my hand rest briefly on the frame. Do you remember this room? I asked casually. He hesitated. Of course. This is where your father kept his records, I continued. And after he passed, it's where I spent nights organizing what he left behind. Statements. Ledgers. Deeds. Grayson straightened. You threw most of that away. I looked at him. No, I said softly. I archived it. The word unsettled him. I could see it in the way his jaw clenched. You always underestimate paperwork, I went on. You think it's just paper. But paper remembers things people try to forget. He shook his head. This is going too far, he said. You're talking in circles. Am I? I asked. Or are you? I stepped back to the table and sat down slowly. Tell me, Grayson, when did you first decide that I wouldn't notice? His mouth opened, then closed. Notice what? The transfers, I said. Small enough to feel safe. Timed carefully so they blended into routine expenses. He laughed, but the sound was thin. You're imagining things. Imagining doesn't create patterns, I replied. Patterns repeat. I folded my hands. You were careful at first. That's how I know this wasn't an accident. Accidents are messy. This was methodical. He rubbed his palms together, a habit he had when thinking quickly. Even if, he began, then stopped. The word hung in the air. Even if. The language of bargaining. Even if there were mistakes, he tried again, they could be fixed. Quietly. There it was. The shift. Not denial anymore, but negotiation. I met his gaze. Fixing something requires admitting it exists, I said. And that's not where you are yet. His voice dropped. What do you want? The question surprised him as much as it did me. Power reveals itself when someone asks instead of demands. I didn't answer immediately. Silence stretched again, heavy and deliberate. I want the truth, I said finally. Not because I need it, but because you do. He looked away, staring at the table as if it might offer him an escape. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, he muttered. Pressure doesn't create character, I replied. It reveals it. He exhaled sharply. If this goes public, it won't, I interrupted calmly. He looked up. How can you be so sure? I tilted my head slightly. Because investigations don't become public unless someone panics and makes them visible. His face drained of color. In that moment, I saw it clearly. The truth wasn't something I had to force out of him. It was something he was already carrying, heavy and unstable, waiting for the smallest push to spill. And I hadn't even delivered the hardest part yet. Grayson's shoulders sagged as if the weight he had been carrying finally pressed down all at once. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat, rubbing his temples with both hands. You don't understand how things work downtown, he said quietly. Everyone cuts corners. Everyone moves money. It's how deals survive. I watched him closely. When people stop defending and start explaining, the truth is close. I understand pressure, I replied. I survived it. He looked up, eyes red. I was trying to protect what we built, he said. The market changed. Fees rose. Investors demanded returns. His voice cracked. I told myself I'd put it back. I nodded slowly. That's what people always tell themselves. He swallowed. How much do you know? The question came out smaller than before. I answered by opening the drawer beside me and sliding a thin envelope onto the table. His eyes locked onto it. Before you ask, I said calmly, no computers were harmed in the making of this. His jaw tightened despite himself. 8 years ago, I continued, I opened a secondary account under a family trust. I didn't tell you because I didn't need to. I deposited small amounts. Consistently. Quietly. His breath caught. I tracked inflows and outflows by hand, I went on. Dates. Amounts. Destinations. When something didn't align, I marked it. He reached for the envelope, then hesitated. 2 years ago, I added, I enrolled in evening classes at the community college. Financial compliance. Basic legal procedure. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to know when something wasn't right. He shook his head slowly. You planned this. No, I said. I prepared. There's a difference. He finally opened the envelope, scanning the pages inside. The color drained from his face line by line. These transfers, he whispered. They're all here. Every one, I said. Including the payments to your consultant. He flinched. She wasn't, he stopped himself. Silence again. I never wanted to hurt you, he said finally. Intent doesn't erase impact, I replied. He looked up, eyes searching. If this goes forward, it doesn't have to, I said gently. Hope flickered. Dangerous hope. But understand this, I continued, leaning in just enough for him to feel it. The reason it doesn't go forward is not because you deserve protection. It's because I refuse to become someone who uses power the way you did. His shoulders began to shake. He covered his face with his hands, breath hitching. The collapse wasn't loud. It never is. It was quiet, internal, the sound of someone realizing the version of themselves they believed in no longer exists. I waited. I had learned patience long before this moment. And when he finally looked up, eyes raw and unguarded, I knew the final truth was ready to surface. Grayson sat in silence for a long moment, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of confidence. I started small, he said. Just enough to cover gaps. I told myself it was temporary. He looked up at me, eyes wet, unguarded. Then it got easier. And then it got normal. I nodded. That's how lines disappear, I said. Not all at once. One step at a time. He swallowed hard. I forged the signatures, he admitted. I moved the money. I thought you'd never notice. The room felt still, heavy, honest. Outside, a car passed slowly down our Brookhaven Street, ordinary life continuing without regard for the truth unfolding inside my kitchen. I need you to listen carefully, I said. What you did doesn't end because you confessed. It ends because you change. He nodded quickly. I will. I swear. Promises are easy when consequences arrive. This is what will happen, I continued calmly. You will reverse every transfer. You will correct every filing. You will do it properly, quietly, and completely. He opened his mouth to speak. I raised a hand. And you will do it without my help. Because responsibility doesn't grow when someone carries it for you. His shoulders slumped, but he nodded again. If anyone asks, I added, I will not protect you with lies. I will protect the truth by keeping it contained. That is the only grace I am offering. He exhaled shakily. Why? The question was small. Honest. Because power used to punish teaches fear, I replied. Power used to correct teaches accountability. Tears rolled down his face. He didn't wipe them away. I forgot who you were, he said. I stood and placed the envelope back into the drawer. No, I said softly. You never knew. We sat there for a while, the distance between us no longer defined by deception but by consequence. In the weeks that followed, Grayson did exactly what I told him to do. He fixed the filings. He returned the money. He stopped explaining and started listening. He spoke less. He thought more. People noticed the change, though they never knew the reason. That was fine with me. I didn't need recognition. I needed resolution. Today, I still live in Brookhaven. I still don't use a computer. I still keep my records by hand. And my son no longer assumes silence means weakness. He understands now what I learned long ago. That strength doesn't announce itself. It waits. It watches. And when the moment arrives, it speaks just loudly enough to be heard. The silence that followed Grayson's confession did not end when he left my house that afternoon. It followed him downtown to Atlanta, into glass offices and polished hallways where confidence is currency and mistakes are hidden behind meetings. I stayed in Brookhaven, watering my plants and organizing papers the same way I always had, because real consequences don't arrive with noise. They arrive slowly. Grayson began calling me every morning. Not to explain. Not to impress. Just to check in. That alone told me how deeply things had shifted. At his office, he spoke less and listened more. Colleagues noticed. People always do when someone who used to dominate a room suddenly becomes careful. One afternoon, he called me with a tight voice. "There are questions," he said. "Not about us. About someone else." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. Investigations ripple outward. They don't stay contained. That was a lesson Grayson was learning in real time. A junior associate in his firm had been flagged for irregular filings. Nothing dramatic yet, but enough to remind everyone how fragile reputations can be. Grayson came by my house that evening, standing on the porch longer than necessary before knocking. He looked older. Not weaker. More aware. "I fixed the last transfer today," he said. "The account's balance now." I nodded. "Good." He hesitated. "I keep expecting someone to call." "They might," I replied. "Or they might not." He frowned. "How can you be so calm?" I looked at him. "Because fear loses power when you stop lying." That night, after he left, I returned to my study and reviewed the old ledgers again. Not because I suspected him anymore, but because habits like vigilance don't disappear overnight. I remembered nights after my husband's death, sitting at the same desk, learning systems I never planned to understand. Back then, survival required attention. Now, wisdom required restraint. A week later, Grayson told me he had declined a promotion. "It came with expectations," he said carefully. "Expectations I don't want anymore." I didn't congratulate him. Growth doesn't need applause. It needs consistency. In Brookhaven, neighbors still waved. Lawns were still trimmed. Nothing on the surface had changed. But underneath, something important had. My son had learned that power taken quietly can be lost the same way. And I had learned something too. That the hardest part of holding someone accountable isn't exposing them. It's trusting them afterward. Trust, like silence, must be earned again and again. And I was watching *** long before Grayson learned how to negotiate deals and wear confidence like a tailored suit. I learned how to survive without anyone noticing. Brookhaven wasn't always quiet for me. There was a time when every sound felt loud because I was listening for loss. My husband died suddenly, a heart attack on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that reminds you how fragile plans really are. One moment we were discussing groceries, the next I was standing alone in a hospital hallway trying to understand paperwork written in a language grief refuses to translate. No one prepares you for the loneliness of responsibility. There was no one to explain things slowly to me. No one to soften the words. I had a child to raise and a life to keep upright. So I learned. I learned how to read contracts line by line because missing one sentence could cost a home. I learned how to track expenses because one careless month could undo years of effort. At night, after Grayson fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with bills spread out, teaching myself patterns the way some people teach themselves prayers. I didn't become careful because I wanted power. I became careful because mistakes were expensive. Years later, when computers replaced ledgers and offices replaced handwritten notes, I didn't follow. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. The principles stayed the same. Numbers still told stories. People still revealed themselves through habits. When Grayson grew older and began helping with finances, I saw pride settle into him early. Pride isn't dangerous by itself. It becomes dangerous when it goes unquestioned. I let him take over gradually. I watched how quickly he grew comfortable. How easily he dismissed my questions. Comfort creates blind spots. I never corrected him because I recognized something familiar. The same confidence I once saw in men who underestimated me after my husband's death. They assumed quiet meant incapable. They were wrong then. He was wrong now. Sitting alone in my study that night, after Grayson had left, I touched the edges of the old ledgers and felt no bitterness. Only clarity. Everything I had endured had prepared me for this moment. Not to control my son, but to ensure that the cycle of quiet mistakes ended with him. Strength doesn't arrive suddenly. It is built in invisible hours, in uncelebrated effort, in learning when no one is watching. And as Brookhaven settled into another peaceful evening, I understood something fully. The past hadn't hardened me. It had trained me. The real test didn't come from Grayson. It came from the world he had nearly lost control of. 3 weeks after he declined the promotion, a notice circulated quietly through his firm about a compliance review. Not an investigation. Not yet. Just a review. The kind that makes people revisit old files and reconsider past decisions. Grayson called me that night, his voice steady but careful. "They're checking several departments," he said. Not mine specifically. I could hear the restraint in his tone. He wasn't asking for reassurance. He was reporting. That mattered. "Good," I replied. "Reviews are meant to correct, not destroy." He paused. "If they find something, they'll find what's there," I said. Nothing more. Silence followed. Then he exhaled. In Atlanta, offices stayed lit late that week. People worked carefully, spoke less freely, double-checked signatures. Fear had done what rules often fail to do. It slowed everyone down. Grayson came by my house again that weekend. He didn't sit at the kitchen table this time. He stood, uncertain, like someone waiting for permission he no longer assumed he had. "I told them about a discrepancy I caught," he said. "One that wasn't mine." I studied him. "Why?" "Because it was wrong," he said simply. That answer told me more than any confession ever could. Accountability isn't proven when no one is watching. It's proven when the cost is real. Over the following days, the review passed through his firm without incident. No calls. No subpoenas. Just a quiet correction, of course. Grayson didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He adjusted. That was how I knew the lesson had taken root. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun settle over Brookhaven, he spoke without looking at me. "I used to think power was about control," he said. "Now I think it's about restraint." I nodded. "Control fades," I replied. "Restraint lasts." He smiled faintly. Not the smile he used in meetings. A smaller one. A real one. And in that moment, I knew the most dangerous chapter of our story was truly behind us. Time did what it always does when allowed to work honestly. It softened what needed softening and strengthened what needed to hold. Grayson settled into a quieter version of himself. He changed firms 6 months later, not out of fear, but intention. He chose a role with less prestige and more transparency. People noticed the shift, though few understood it. That was fine. Understanding isn't required for change to be real. In Brookhaven, my days returned to their familiar rhythm. Morning walks. Handwritten notes. Ledgers that balanced because attention never wavered. Neighbors still saw me as the quiet widow who waved politely and kept to herself. They never knew what had unfolded behind my kitchen table. That was intentional. Power doesn't need witnesses. One afternoon, Grayson brought me a new notebook. Thick paper. Simple cover. "For your records," he said. I smiled. "I already have enough," I replied. He nodded. "I know. I just wanted to say I see it now." That mattered more than the notebook ever could. As the year turned, I reflected on how close silence and strength can look from the outside. How easily one is mistaken for the other. I had let the world believe I was unaware because awareness without purpose is just noise. Purpose gives silence its weight. Grayson never accused me of forgetting again. He never explained things to me slowly. He never mistook patience for weakness. And I never reminded him why. Lessons learned through fear fade. Lessons learned through accountability endure. Today, when people ask me how I stayed calm through everything, I tell them the truth. I didn't stay calm because I was fearless. I stayed calm because I was prepared. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't rush. It doesn't demand recognition. It waits. It observes. And when the moment arrives, it acts with precision. I still live in Brookhaven. I still don't use a computer. I still trust paper more than promises. And my son now understands what took me a lifetime to learn. That the most powerful voice in any room is often the one that speaks last, not first.